I should not have been there. My presence in that moment and in that environment created a perception of the military involved in domestic politics. As a commissioned uniformed officer, it was a mistake that I have learned from, and I sincerely hope we all can learn from it.
Hi again, everybody. It's now 5 o'clock in New York. It takes a lot for any human being to admit a mistake, probably an extra a lot for a man of his stature, a man in uniform, to make that kind of declaration publicly, just to own it. But I show it to you because it demonstrates just how far General Mark Milley, who was then the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the staff, wanted to separate himself from what he did and how much he wanted to separate the military, the United States military, from domestic politics. General Milley made that televised apology after he was photographed with then President Trump walking through Washington, D.C.'s Lafayette Square, following authorities who were using tear gas to clear peaceful protest. So the idea that General Milley would say or do anything ever again that would give even the slightest sense that he would ever again make that mistake and wade into politics is important to have in mind. It illustrates, I think it's the most public-facing piece of evidence of his degree of alarm now, today, about this, our election. In newly revealed conversations between General Milley and the author Bob Woodward, written about in Bob Woodward's new book, War, General Milley felt compelled to clarify and articulate his concern about the future of our country should Donald Trump ever return to power. He cornered Bob Woodward at a 200-person reception in March 2023 and said this, quote, "He is the most dangerous person ever. I had suspicions when I talked to you about his mental decline, and so forth. But now I realize he's a total fascist. He is the most dangerous person to this country," end quote. A fascist to the core, General Milley repeated. Bob Woodward said he will never forget the intensity of Milley's worry in that moment. Now, this should be stop everything stuff, right? Truly stunning words out of the mouth of one of the most respected people in this country, one of the most respected people who's ever served our country. And we should focus on them because we have them now. And we're just 21 days out from this hugely consequential election. And those words were uttered by a man who devoted his entire life, literally decades, protecting the men and women who served under him and all of us who went about our lives, protecting the American people by upholding the U.S. Constitution. At his retirement ceremony last year, General Milley nodded to Donald Trump's anti-democratic impulses, but did so without naming names.
We don't take an oath to a country. We don't take an oath to a tribe. We don't take an oath to a religion. We don't take an oath to a king or a queen or to a tyrant or a dictator. And we don't take an oath to a wannabe dictator.
A wannabe dictator. Only one guy that fits that description. And we have that. We have that information. And now we have this from Woodward's book. Now, Milley's warning to Bob Woodward that the man running to be our commander-in-chief is, quote, fascist to the core, General Milley's words, holds even more weight over these past few days as we've heard the ex-president's mask slip and publicly call Americans who disagree with Donald Trump and MAGA, quote, the enemy within, end quote. Trump's rhetoric so dangerous that Vice President Kamala Harris highlighted it during her rally last night. She played it, as we showed you in our last hour. What she played at her rally was a compilation of Trump's comments and made remarks that echo what we heard General Milley warn us about.
This is among the reasons I believe so strongly that a second Trump term would be a huge risk for America and dangerous. Donald Trump is increasingly unstable and unhinged. And he is out for unchecked power. That's what he's looking for.
Clarity. Vice President Kamala Harris is giving you clarity to choose whomever you would like in November, but you will have clarity, and so is General Mark Milley. He's given it to Bob Woodward. He's given it at that speech about a wannabe dictator, right? Harris is right now taping a live radio conversation with Charlemagne the God in Detroit. We'll bring you some of those comments. They're available as soon as they get underway. We'll show them to you. We'll play them for you as soon as we have them. But the current GOP presidential nominee being, according to the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, a, quote, fascist, who is, quote, the most dangerous person to the country, is where we start the hour with some of our most valued and favorite experts and friends. Retired four-star general and MSNBC military analyst Barry McCaffrey's here, and CEO of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, Allison Jaslow, is here. Barry McCaffrey, I start with you. Your thoughts on what we have in terms of information. I feel like we've wasted a lot of time waiting for the event where they announce their endorsement of Kamala Harris when all the information is staring us right in the face.
Sure. This is all out in the open. You got to go back to 2020 when it was clear to me and other observers, and I was saying this on NBC News, that Trump was setting up, obviously, the potential for a coup against the Constitution of the United States to seize the election. He had an acting Secretary of Homeland Security. He had an acting Attorney General. He had an acting Secretary of Defense. He tried to fire the CIA director and put an acting director in there. And we should also remind ourselves that the chairman of the JCS, General Mark Milley at the time, but continuing, has no command authority over the armed forces at all. He's an advisor to the president, the Secretary of Defense, and the National Security Council. And so when Secretary Mark Esper was fired and disappeared, and a retired lieutenant colonel functionary of Trump appeared as the acting SecDef, not confirmed by the Senate, the legal chain of command was Trump and this retired lieutenant colonel. So we got to understand that there was a potential for essentially an armed insurrection suppression of an election. Mark Milley, 100 years from now, is going to be studied as a figure of integrity and principle in helping, along with the media and many Republican politicians, in saving the country.
Allison, let me read you more about General Milley's life since retiring, as reported by Bob Woodward. Quote, since retiring, Milley had received a nonstop barrage of death threats that he, at least in part, attributes to Trump's repeated aggressive attempts to discredit him. Quote, he is inciting people to violence with violent rhetoric, Milley told his wife. Quote, but he does it in such a way, it's through the power of suggestion, which is exactly what he did on the 6th of January. As a former chairman, Milley was provided round-the-clock government security for 2 years, but he had taken additional precautions at significant personal expense, installing bulletproof glass and blast-proof curtains at his home. This is the world that Trump has wrought for the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Mark Milley.
Yeah, it's terrifying. I mean, I can't even imagine reading about putting the bulletproof glass in his home, which, you know, obviously he's somebody who served in the military, has been to war, but, you know, certainly his family isn't battle hardened like the general is. But, you know, this also brings up an important point as to what my organization is currently involved in terms of the work of what we're undergoing is traveling across the country right now with our partner Democracy First, bringing together veterans and their neighbors to have conversations about the future of our democracy here. And one of the key tenets we are trying to get citizens across the country to agree to is not supporting any elected leaders or candidates who will incite political violence, that there has to be a red line there. And so there's a real movement. I think it's great that somebody like General Milley is speaking out from his perch, but I really think that it's your everyday veterans, the veterans who live down the street from you, who really need to rise up in this moment and call for better in our country so that we can have a brighter future than the one we feel like we're living in right now.
General